Welcome to episode 4 of the Joint Readiness Training Center, Intel Warfighting Function Best Practices. Today we'll be covering the second part of IPB. As you can see by this chart, we're still on the first bullet of the 8 top best practices of the intelligence warfighting function that make S2s and therefore the entire command team successful. So let's just dive right into that. Yet again, I'm coming to you from my lovely nondescript couch in our housing at Fort Polk, Louisiana, as a part of the Bring the Crucible to Your Couch program. So today we're going to be talking about evaluating the threat and determining threat courses of action. First off, let's take a look at that whole chart right there of all the products that are expected or anticipated coming out of IPB. And if you'll look down at evaluate the threat, what we're really looking at is threat data and threat template. In order to evaluate the threat, the first thing we start with is some sort of a doctrinal baseline understanding of the enemy. And where do we find that? Well, I want you to find it in 7-100 series, which you can find on TRADOC's website, the odin.tradoc. I'll put the link right here for you so that you can go to it later and take a look. There's a lot of great information on there that talks about not just the doctrine, but the tactics that the OPFOR will use. Now, everybody who's been to JRTC is going to say, oh, Geronimo doesn't follow doctrine. Actually, they do follow doctrine. The trick is we give them the doctrine, we tell them what tactics they have to use, but then after that, it's up to the initiative of the soldier of how they're going to perform within that doctrine and those tactics, absolutely no differently than the way your soldiers do it. So keep that in mind when you say they didn't show up exactly 10 minutes after the first piece or 20 minutes after that, or they weren't spaced out the way the picture shows. Nobody's going to do that, so keep that in mind. The other way you get doctrinal understanding or the baseline of the enemy situation is through the Annex B, and you're going to get a read ahead before you come to JRTC. Now, like I've said to other people before, there's this old adage of, well, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. Not so much at JRTC. If you've seen one JRTC rotation, you've seen one JRTC rotation. Other than the doctrine and the tactics, which I said are based on 7-100, which you can find on Odin's website, then you also have the actual situation that you're walking into. So some of the issues we see with evaluating the threat is that people are using historical knowledge from the last time they were at JRTC. Now, that means that we see people come up with all kinds of great ideas, like old Soviet doctrine. I'm not lying, somebody said there was a forward security element and that the car was going to be exactly 1/3 the size of the rest of the unit attacking. For those of you who have gray hair like me, you know exactly where that came from. The new doctrine doesn't use those words. Please go to 7-100 and look at it. We have to have the same understanding of what we're talking about. Remember that your maneuver counterparts, the company commanders, the brigade commander, the battalion commander, the S3, they've all been taught the new doctrine. So if you're talking the old doctrinal terms, you're passing by each other, in which case you're really not doing evaluate the threat because you don't understand the baseline doctrine or the tactics for that matter. What products are coming out of this portion of it? Well, you're going to get something that might look like this, an order of battle chart, and you're going to get some sort of a threat template, which is going to help you understand what the enemy is supposed to look like, what tactics you might see, which doctrine they're using based on the situation. But out of this is also going to come your high-value targets. This is the part where you look at it and say, based on their order of battle, based on their threat template, I expect to see these types of capabilities coming after us, or these types of things that we want to eventually destroy because they are going to make the enemy successful. This is where you start handing that off and you start evaluating these things through the Carver method or whichever method your unit wants to use. And again, I would say when you go back into 2-01.3, it's going to say this is what an HVT list looks like and this is how it's spread out and this is what a Carver matrix looks like. It has to fit the way your commander thinks. It has to fit the way your staff is doing MDMP and how your targeting process is working inside your battalion or inside your brigade. You have to be able to understand those and how you provide intelligence to support that. Now, if they're doing something crazy and off the wall and there is zero way intelligence can support it, then you as an influential leader inside of your battalion really have to dig in and start pushing that yourself. Another thing that comes out of the evaluate the threat, step 3 of IPB, is the beginnings of your BDA chart. Because you've decided that this is what the template's going to look like, this is what the order of battle is going to look like, you can start putting a BDA chart off to the side and say, after I'm done with the sit temp of when I think they're going to attack, I can start building a pretty good BDA chart off of this one. This is where it all really starts to come out. So again, if you're not looking at the doctrine at the beginning, you can't quite get to the high value targets that you want to destroy as a part of your sensor to shooter plan, and you're definitely not going to come up with a good BDA chart. And that brings us to our next piece. This is the exciting part in my mind because I really like this stuff, and that's determining the threat courses of action. This is where you start coming up with the sit temps and the enemy course of action statements and maybe an enemy course of action sketch. I mean, something really cool that you can show, that you can display. This is what I think the enemy is going to do in time and space. The sit temp is a lot of fun in my mind because you get to really take all of the warfighting functions that the enemy has. You get to put them on top of those terrain effects that you came up with in step 2, all the weather effects, all the light effects. Then you get to kind of look at all the doctrine that you looked at in step 3, the template that you have for what type of tactics are they going to use, and then put it on the battlefield. And like I said, show it in such a way that it helps your commander understand, it helps your staff understand, and gives them something to fight. Because remember, if you go back and look at those, what are the outputs of IPB, right back into the inputs of IPB, you find that this is one of those things that goes right into course of action development, and then course of action approval, course of action analysis, like all of that stuff that they're looking at the sit temp and the event matrix. So this step of IPB is where it all really starts to come together. To me, that is fun because it's showing the enemy in time and space. When I say showing the enemy in time and space, what I mean is to show the enemy in the sit temp in such a way that allows the staff to start developing a plan of what they want to do. So imagine your brigade or your battalion is in the defense. The enemy is attacking with, I don't care what size element it is that's attacking you. You'll want to show it in such a way that allows the staff to start developing defensive positions. Where do we want to kill the enemy? So you want to show the best location of where you can kill the enemy. That's terrain analysis. Then you want to be able to show how the enemy is going to be arrayed when they get into that space. Is that the part where they start spreading out and attacking? Is that the part where they engage their engineers forward to breach? Or are they all still stacked up and you're killing them in surprise? Probably not. They're going to pretty much know exactly where your defenses are before you're done digging them. But this is a great opportunity to show where you think the enemy is and what you think they look like just as they make contact. One of the mistakes we see with the sit temp is that the S2 puts the enemy way far back or deep in the battlefield and shows them all still stacked up in a line as they're on a road march, and or has them already dispersed into some sort of attack formation like 10 kilometers out from where we're setting up the defense. And that doesn't allow the company commanders to really understand what their defensive positions need to look like and where they need to be oriented, where the kill sack is going to be, or really where the NAIs become TAIs, so you can't really support the fires plan either. One of the other issues we see with the sit temp is the BCTS2 team puts together a sit temp that has a 2 by 2 kilometer size diamond on the advance and has an arrow with, the double-headed arrow. This is the main effort, and it's this gigantic diamond coming at you that covers over like 3 different routes of march or avenues of approach that it can be taken to come at you, and then hands that to the battalion and goes, hey, here you go. And then the battalion never provides any bottom-up refinement to that one. If you've already worked it out between the BCTS2 and the battalion to say, hey, I'm only going to give you this kind of garbage, like I'm just going to throw this gigantic diamond on top of you, and you provide something back to me that shows it appropriate to echelon, meaning brigade looking at companies and battalions looking at platoons and below, I should be showing from the battalion back up to the brigade of, actually, you put this big diamond over 3 routes, but I think it's really going to be more this route, and the exploitation force is going to come this way, but an enabling attack is over here, and blah, blah, blah. If that's what the battalion wants to provide up to the brigade, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. But what we see a lot is that you get this gigantic diamond, and then the battalion takes that exact same diamond and then just splits it up into 3 smaller diamonds, saying those are the platoons. And then nobody takes the next level, the next step to say, where are all of the important pieces of that attack? Where's the anti-tank weapon systems? Where's the air defense? All of the warfighting functions end up not being identified. or they just put a big giant diamond 10 kilometers back and say, artillery. It would really help the fires plan if you came up with a good spot of where you think it's going to be. And that brings me to the next point of the sit temp. You're not alone, S2. You're not alone. Reach out to people who are smarter than you. And yes, people are smarter than you. Get over it. The piece you need to think about is your NCOs have been doing this for a long time. Take advantage of one of them and ask them to take one of the warfighting functions and learn it better than anybody else. Tell them to go figure out what an engineer looks like as they're attacking a breach, the enemy engineers attacking the breach. Have them go talk to the engineers and learn something about that. And then when it comes time to developing the sit temp, you go, you're my engineer person, go for it. Get one of your soldiers to go talk to the infantry. Get her to go talk to them and say, hey, I need to understand what the infantry looks like in the defense, especially in an area that looks like this. And any infantryman can walk you through that and say, this is what I think, this is how I would array my defense if I had one anti-tank weapon system and a couple of crew-served weapon systems, and this was the route, and this is what I expected to see. This is how I would establish it. And then she can come back and be your expert on this is how the infantry is going to set up a defense. But this is also an opportunity to just go and grab the division engineer or the brigade engineer and pull them in and say, hey, walk me through this one. How's the enemy going to set up a defense? I mean, I think they're going to make us turn and go over here because this is where they want to kill us, but I don't understand how they would do that. Please tell me where the obstacles are going to be so I can give that to the battalion. The battalion can send the scouts out there to go confirm or deny the obstacle belt so we can confirm or deny that course of action. Use the experts that you have available. And then, of course, the last thing we see when it comes to the sit temp is they don't take the terrain analysis, the weather analysis, the light analysis, the threat template, and all that and bring it all together. What you end up with is they just took the threat template and threw it on top of the map and said, go forth and do great things because they don't really understand the terrain or the weather. And that's a little heartbreaking for me because, like I said, this is the fun part of doing this kind of tactical intelligence stuff is that determining the threat course of action. You kind of get to be the bad guy for a little while and have some fun with it and then fight your S3 in the wargaming because this is the part where you get to say, like, no, my plan's better than yours and make the 3 beat you. That's the part that 2s all too often just automatically assume the 3's going to beat me anyway, so I don't care. No, make your 3 earn it. Really make them earn it. That brings us to the event temp. The event temp is, as everybody knows, multiple sit temps slapped on top of each other so you can identify where the differences and the similarities are, so you can identify the NAIs, come up with the decision points, how are you going to determine what's inside those NAIs, blah, blah, blah. And so you come up with that. And if you didn't have time phase lines on the sit temp, which I know it says to do that now, I didn't grow up that way. See, doctrine changes. If you didn't have the time phase lines on your sit temp, this is where you would then make sure all your time phase lines are on the event temp. So now you've got multiple time phase lines, lots of NAIs, a couple of decision points, and then, of course, multiple different versions of what the enemy is doing. Well, let me ask you this then. Is the event temp of any value if you were to just hand it to somebody? I'm going to go ahead and tell you no. I can look at somebody else's event temp and just immediately my head explodes. I have no idea what's going on in that event temp. It takes me a long time to figure that out. I can look at the one I created and go, yeah, I get it. And I can brief somebody on it. You see, this part is this course of action, this part's this course of action, this part's this course of action. But that doesn't mean I can hand it to somebody else. We have a tool that allows you to talk through your event temp. It's called the event matrix. The event matrix is the Word or Excel version of your event temp. I cannot tell you how many units come through here. Actually, I will tell you, all of them. All of them, at one point or another, fail to create an event matrix. Every one of them. I don't understand it. It's the last step. It takes all this great stuff you did, terrain analysis, weather analysis, light analysis, evaluating the threat. You've come up with multiple courses of action. You've got a great idea of what the enemy's going to do. You put it on event temp. You've got a reasonable number of NAIs. You've got a couple of decision points. You've got HVTs. You've got a BDA chart. And nobody knows what the hell you're talking about because you never came up with an event matrix. Now, how I sell the event matrix to people to say, this is how you create one and or this is how you make sure that your people want one is, S2, if you want to go to sleep, have an event matrix. Because the event matrix says, I expect to see this happen at this time, at these locations, this is what it means, and this is what you do with the information. That's your event matrix. I expect to see T80 somewhere in this NAI. I think it means course of action 1. If you see these things, tell current ops, call the shadow and move it over to verify, whatever it might be, and then wake me up. But if you want to stay there the whole time because you're the only one who knows your sit temp and your event temp and you're going to sit in the talk the whole time, you will fail. Your event matrix means you can go to sleep. Give that a try. But more importantly, your event matrix also leads to the collection plan. If you're creating a collection plan just off of the sit temp, or you're creating a collection plan before you even started IPB, you're wrong. Your ICSM is taking your event matrix to the next level, which is, this is how I'm going to see it. These are the methods. These are the times that I expected to see it. This is how I'm going to go see it. Well, if it's no surprise to you, I get very excited about this part of IPB because, like I said, you get to have a lot of fun with it. But it's not the end-all, be-all of IPB. You have to start with the basics. Like I said, we don't have a problem with people understanding the area of operations and area of interest and the general understanding of the terrain and the weather. Where we start to see issues is when we ask people to put effects off of the data that they've collected on the weather and the light and the terrain. And then when we start talking about evaluating the threat, they reach all the way back into antiquity and start talking about insurgencies and villages that don't exist. They've either been razed or we've changed the names of them 2 or 3 years ago, and yet you're still using those names. It tells me you didn't even try to do step 3. So if you're not doing terrain and weather analysis, and then you're not really thinking your way through the doctrine or the actual situation that you're fighting, how are you ever really coming up with a good enemy course of action? And then therefore, how's your collection plan really going to look? So everything hinges on this very beginning of doing IPB. I cannot stress it enough. And that really closes out the first bullet of our 8, which is a good S2, understands the 4 core competencies, can do the intelligence process, understands it and executes it, and then does good IPB. Join us next time when we'll move into the next couple of bullets of the 8 best practices of the intelligence warfighting function. Again, you can reach me at the information that we have down here at the bottom of the screen and follow us on Twitter at India6JRTC. Or give me a call sometime. I've got my phone number on the final credits, and we'll try and cover whatever it is you need. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Stay smart. Go wash your hands.